Mary Berger. Mary is a multidisciplinary artist and writer based in Oakland, California. Her work explores aspects of perception, memory, and narratives of self and relation. She uses painting, mixed media, and fiber arts to explore pattern, color, and tactility as modes of dynamic variability and rhythms of instability and change. Since the outbreak of the COVID pandemic, her work has increasingly focused on themes of vulnerability and resilience. I'm going to turn it over to her to talk about this incredible work of art. The title alone, Razzle Dazzle Melanism, just gives you a little inkling of what's to come, and I'm so happy you have this. It's amazing. All right, thank you, Mary.
Thank you, Courtney. Well, I'm going to give a little talk to break down the title, what it means, why I made this project, and a little bit about how I made it. Let me know if I need to speak up. So, the razzle dazzle part of the title comes from something called dazzle camouflage, or razzle dazzle. It was a phenomenon used in World War I by Allied forces to attempt to disguise warships. So it was these large geometric patterns that were meant to confuse anyone from the enemy sides who were trying to understand what those ships were or where they were going. Allegedly, these patterns would make it hard to see how big a ship was, what kind of ship it was, how fast it was going. I don't know if any of this worked, but it was a really fascinating phenomenon, and I was really excited to find out about it. So as you can see in this drawing, they used a lot of bright colors for these patterns, but all of the photos are in black and white because they're more than 100 years old. So this was the way I was thinking about it when I first discovered it, before I found the color drawings, and that's the way I worked with it for a number of reasons. The other part of the title, Industrial Melanism, the other part of the title is melanism. That refers to industrial melanism, which is an evolutionary effect among some moths and other insects, where dark pigmentation from the hormone melanin evolves in the wings of the insect in an environment that's affected by pollution. So in the early decades of the Industrial Revolution in England, when they were burning lots and lots of coal, pouring lots and lots of soot into the air, the buildings, the trees, all the surfaces that moths would land on were darkened, and so the moths that had darker wings were more likely to survive because they wouldn't be seen by predators. So I wanted to put those concepts together. I worked on this project in 2014. I was thinking a lot about surveillance at that time. Edward Snowden had recently released the documents from the NSA revealing the global surveillance project that the US was involved in. And it was also shortly after Occupy Wall Street. People were very aware of the increased surveillance on public protests. Police and other agencies were starting to use facial recognition software to identify people who were in these protests. So people started posting photos like this woman wearing makeup that was meant to thwart the facial recognition software so that you couldn't be identified. So I was thinking a lot about these issues of surveillance. I don't know if you can see this one. This is just another picture of the moths. There's a light moth and the dark moth that you might not be able to see. That was the whole point. But anyway, so I was thinking about surveillance and what are ways that we can counteract surveillance. Of course, camouflage is a time-honored defense against that in the animal and the human kingdoms, or not kingdoms, let's use another word, populations. But as the years have gone by, I've been thinking about these more in terms of this project, more in terms of adaptation than in terms of surveillance. I mean, that was always an element of it, but I think partly because as the years have gone by, we've seen that the things we feared several years ago, around the time of the Snowden documents and such, things like using internet data to manipulate public opinion, using internet data to distort election outcomes, using internet data to erode and violently confront institutions of democracy. Those have all already happened. We're in a different state than we were 8 years ago. At the same time, we're increasingly aware and experiencing the consequences of climate change. It's becoming more and more apparent that we're going to be living with these dramatic changes for the foreseeable future. Wildfires and floods and hurricanes and melting ice caps and mass extinctions and so on. Along with that, the increasingly violent backlash against science and public education. So all of that has shifted this project in my mind to be a bit more about adaptation and surveillance. Of course, those issues are all connected: the erosion of democracy, the erosion of the climate. It's just a sort of shift in the balance of those powers, I guess. So now on to some things about how I made this project. So I have to confess, these are made with MDF. 8 years ago, I wasn't aware of a green source of MDF. Things like that are happily changing a lot. So of course, if I made them today, I'd use different material. But I needed a rigid surface, and I needed to make the panels myself because I couldn't find anything this size. So here I am in my house making the panels, gluing them down, weighing them down with stacks of books so that they would dry flat. And there's a seam up the middle of them. I really wanted that seam to be invisible, so I was working on that with spackle. And then painting the panels, I got a custom white paint mixed to match the white of the paper. So this is screen print on paper collaged onto the panel. So I wanted the white of the paper to exactly match the white of the paint because I wanted the image to just blend in with the background. And then I screen printed the segments that would become the collage pattern. I'm just going to say a little bit about screen print if there's anyone who's not familiar with that. You have a screen, you apply, it used to be made of silk, often now they're made of something synthetic, but anyway, you apply a stencil to the screen, you put ink on the top of the screen, lay it on your paper and push the ink through the screen with a squeegee. There's various ways to make stencils. One way is to print the image onto a piece of transparency. Wherever the black is, that's where the ink will go. There's a way that you expose the screen, you use light-sensitive emulsion. Anyway, but the thing to know is that the thing to know is that what's black on the transparency is where the ink goes on the image.
Mary, if you're comfortable handing the screen around for people to actually hold up to the light and you can see that process, it's the ink going through the screen. If you're comfortable.
Yeah, so there's an ink stain on this screen because sometimes it's hard to wash all the ink out after it's been washed. So this text wouldn't appear on a print that you've made with this screen. But yeah, if anyone wants to handle the screen, you're welcome to do that. If you don't want to, you don't have to. Or if anyone wants to look at the transparency, that's also welcome. Anyway, so I had to print multiples. I came up with these patterns, made stencils of them, made screens of them, and then did multiple prints of each type of pattern, maybe 15 or 20 of each. I needed a lot of that. I didn't know how many I needed, but I just knew I'd need a lot. Kind of tried to estimate the square footage of how much space I needed to cover, but I also needed to allow for making up the pattern as I went along, so I didn't know how much of each image I'd want to use. And then I had to make the butterfly silhouettes. So I got the silhouettes off of the internet, but they're about that big, so I had to blow them up. And the way I came up with doing this, you probably can't see this very well, but there's little boxes, numbered boxes around the perimeter of the butterfly. Those were individual little 8.5, 11 sheets of paper that I printed out to make a full-scale mock-up of the shape of the butterflies. And then I used that mock-up to make a tissue paper pattern. You really probably can't see that, but there's a white tissue paper pattern on the white panel. And then I laid the tissue paper pattern on top of the pieces of paper and just moved those pieces around to get a pattern that I wanted. It took a while. Like when I first started, I didn't want something like this where there's so many horizontal lines in a row. I wanted there to be as much movement as possible and variety and kind of instability in the pattern. So eventually I would figure out how I wanted it to look and then cut the pieces to shape and glue them down. And so this is this one finished. And this is where the pieces were first exhibited. This is a place called the Compound Gallery in Oakland. This gallery, this room is actually a narrow space between the front main gallery and the art studios in back, so it's only about 8 feet wide. And I scaled the piece. I wanted to take up this entire, pretty much take up this entire wall. It was 8 feet high and 18 feet wide. So I wanted that to just, I wanted these pieces to just dominate that space. And you can't stand back very far, so that they are really in your face when you walk into that corridor. Oh, and didn't want to forget this. So not that many people want to have a 6.5-foot panel in their house, but if you're interested in the piece, there's a smaller version available, a screen print, and they have these at in the flat file or wherever they're keeping the prints. And so, what else do I want to say? So this is a photo looking the other direction in that corridor, taken with a wide-angle lens, just to show you the scale of that room. I think my friend Andrew might have taken that photo. I'm not sure. And this is what that panel looks like in my house, where it lives when it's not here. So that's all I wanted to say. Anybody have any thoughts or questions? Or
I've got.
Yeah.
I really actually so appreciate the fact that you showed the process of laying it out physically instead of doing it digitally. Like you could have totally rendered this in Photoshop or Illustrator and laid it out and not had that experience of happenstance, serendipity, and accident that might come from actually doing it in the realm of like physical space, like in constructing it. And that was something that I actually very much have learned about you, is appreciating your way of constructing things. There's a purity in your process that is very rare and unique. I don't know if you know that. Well, we wanted to show these pieces in January in the alcoves, but they were too heavy. And so this really amazing to be able to bring them here and how it tied in curatorially,
Yeah.
without planning. That was part of the serendipity and the strength of this show. So I think that your process and the fact that those are paper on camera, it's really cool.
I really love the way this whole room works together. I love the black on white across from this white on black, this very subtle, massive installation. I like working with trans butterflies. These are pieces I've known and loved for many years, and it's fun to have them together. And the trees, it's just perfect, this sort of paper forest that's taking over this wall. In terms of process, I really don't know how I could have done this digitally, because I didn't have any way to figure out what I needed to print. I mean, I had to print all these different possibilities. I guess if I had designed it digitally, it would have been really a lot more work even to try to design it digitally and then print that thing. Anyway, but yeah, thank you for saying that. It was a fun process. Most of my projects aren't like this. I don't have a concept and then execute it kind of exactly from start to finish. There's usually a lot more improvisation. But this was just one of those times when I liked how it ended up, and it was pretty much the way I thought of it. It pretty much went the way from concept to execution.
Well, your work is also super deeply intense, and I think that I guess it's the Land show, and then we see how it resonates, right?
Yeah, what was that show called?
That was with your small,
yeah, it was.
Was it the women's show or the Land show? I'm sorry, I don't even actually
It was the
know.
women's.
It was the
Women
show,
Rising,
but
yeah.
You had your smaller pieces that were about battlegrounds, right? If you're
Mm.
It has a history, it has, there's so much relevance to like your mathematical brain and your historical brain and how you see the world. And it comes out really, I mean, like laying this out in the physical, like that's part of it. I think a lot of people will go digital to lay it out with that problem because it's easy to have lots of different options. When you're working in the real, like you're really limited physically, but at the same time you're not because you're constructing it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, certainly I rely on digital tools for, you know, a lot of research and a lot of mock-ups, but yeah, I do like to have a hands-on element. I mean, that's the point of it. I want to use my hands. I also just want to say, you know, I really appreciate Courtney and Renee giving me this space. It was just perfect. These two, you know, inset walls for these panels, and it's just great to have them in a big room. Like I said, the first time they were exhibited was probably this wide. Like you could almost reach from wall to wall, so you could only stand back this way. So it's great to be able to stand back. At least this is the first experience I've had to be able to stand back from them. And letting me drill into the concrete walls to bolt them in place. That was great.
You took on the hardest part, the lights. So the lights are not a changeable thing, and the conduit is not a changeable thing either, right? So this is the wall of complexity for us as couriers. And the pieces were big enough to span this, right? Like she's covering the conduit, the switches, all of that, and like the lights behind it are actually backlighting them in a way that really happens serendipitously also. I don't know, it's kind of nice.
Yeah, we didn't even talk about that. And then when I saw that you'd done it, I was like, oh, that's brilliant.
Okay,
Because,
can I show you one more thing? I spent a lot of time here and I play a lot, so.
oh, nice, yeah.
I need to come in here very rarely and open the space up in the morning and it's dark and the first thing I do is turn these on. I don't actually turn these overheads on because they're just like, ugh! And I come in here and I kind of meditate. Like, I gotta tell you, like it's been a joy. And I think the backlit, I don't know, this is like a totally different thing, right?
It really is. Yeah, because I designed them to be hung flush against the wall, but that wasn't an option here. So, yeah, this is equally great.
And they're also very institutional lighting. Like it's just like,
Yeah.
like I don't know, it feels very government lighting. Fluorescent standard.
These, you mean? Or even
The,
those?
the,
Yeah.
all of them, like
Yeah.
like you know,
Yeah, it's all workspace, functional.
yeah. But really, is it? Well, we're making it.
Yeah. So, anyway, yeah.
There's a really limiting materials question again, which is, why did you choose MDF? Because, I mean, I would have chosen it because it's cheap and functional. Like, I just feel like we're talking about MDF as this thing that everyone knows is cheap, and we haven't said that it's cheap.
I don't know that it's necessarily
Or, like,
cheaper
it's
than,
less expensive
I
than
think it's
hardwood.
cheaper than plywood. Oh, there's no way I could get
Like, you-
solid
exactly.
hardwood, and this size would be hundreds of thousands of dollars. Yeah.
MDF, and we're like
Um,
waiting on it without saying what it proposed.
I mean, I could possibly have used plywood. That would be more expensive. I wanted something pretty thin. This is quarter-inch plywood. You can get it, but yeah, I mean, plywood is not that much more ecological than MDF. It still uses resin. So I guess what I like about MDF is it does use a waste product. It uses sawdust, which would otherwise not be used. What they need to do is get a better kind of resin, and there are plant-based resins that are coming to market. There's even a plant-based acrylic medium. You were the person who asked about acrylic paint, right?
I'm a materials girl tonight.
And I'm just thrilled to find out it's very, very hard to get, but there is a plant-based acrylic medium as opposed to one made from petroleum products. So that's a game changer.
Cool. Thanks.
Yeah.
Renee, thanks for turning off the lights and showing us the beautiful blue light experience.
It's kind of fun, right?
It is totally fun and beautiful. Oh
Well, the
my
problem
God.
is now I turn those off, so hopefully the next artist will be okay with them flickering maybe for a second,
Oh, really?
or staying off. But luckily, like that's we'll finish that and the experience.
It's
Yeah.
really gorgeous.
Thank you. Thank you, Mary.
Thank you.
Mary's first screen prints we have on the piano. We also have them in the flat files, and they are available online